I sentence you to death for the murder of Charles Humphreys.
Thank you. And probably see, I'll be up in heaven while y'all are rotting in hell.
I'm leaving. I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass. And I cannot go in the execution chamber and be executed under the devil. I have to come clean and cleanse my spirit in the name of Jesus Christ.
May 15th, 1992. Aileen Wuornos was sentenced to death after a car crash in Orange Springs, Florida tied her to 7 murders. While Wuornos initially showed no remorse and was openly defensive, no one expected the things she did as her execution date approached. This is what happened in the final 24 hours of Aileen Wuornos.
I cannot go in the execution chamber and die in the execution chamber as a liar.
October 7th, 2002, just 2 days before her execution, Aileen Wuornos sat down for her final interview with documentary filmmaker Nick Broomfield. The meeting takes place inside a prison interview room at Broward Correctional Institution in Florida. Before the camera started rolling, the room was quiet and tense. That's not all. Guards were also placed behind Wuornos because of her unpredictable nature.
I was just wondering how you're going to be, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared. I'm all right with it.
At first, Wuornos seemed calm and even friendly toward Broomfield. For a moment, it looked like the conversation might remain steady and emotional, but that feeling didn't last long. Very quickly, her mood shifted, her voice became sharp, her tone grew angry, and her words turned into a storm of accusations and paranoid ideas.
You changed your story. I'm just trying to...
What are you talking about? Change story on what?
No, about whether it was self-defense or not.
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to get in depth about my cases, Nick.
One of the first things she claimed was that the prison staff had been poisoning her. She said the food and drink she was given were making her sick. According to Wuornos, she had been suffering from pain, blurry vision, weakness, and what she described as her body slowly falling apart. Now, she believed this was being done on purpose to harm her before the state officially executed her. Whether or not these symptoms were real, it was clear that she truly believed she was being attacked from within the prison walls. Wuornos also accused the cops of a cover-up, implying that they could have stopped her after her first murder.
After Richard Mallory died, I left prints everywhere, and they covered it up and let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer.
She didn't stop here. Wuornos said she was being tortured, not just physically, but mentally as well. She believed that guards, doctors, and other prison staff were all part of a plan to make her suffer. She described the prison as a place where she had been isolated, mistreated, and silenced. In her mind, she wasn't just a prisoner. She believed she was a target of the system, a woman being punished not only for her crimes, but also for daring to speak out against the way she had been treated. Aileen Wuornos became increasingly vocal about what she described as a campaign of torment by prison authorities using sonic pressure. Now, she claimed that the sound waves were being directed at her head, crushing her skull, and inducing unbearable mental distress. According to Wuornos, these waves were psychological, manipulating her thoughts, interfering with her mind, and creating extreme agitation. She described the experience as both compressive and disorienting, likening it to a form of invisible torture designed to drive her insane. She said that this sonic pressure was being used regularly at Florida's Broward Correctional Institution, particularly at night, as a method of harassment and mind control.
And they were using sonic pressure on my head since 1997.
Wuornos believed the guards were doing this intentionally to make her appear unstable. During interviews with Broomfield, she became visibly distressed while speaking about these attacks, often contradicting herself mid-sentence, as though trying to wrestle her thoughts free from their grip. As the interview continued, her words became more chaotic. At times, she seemed to feel sorry for what she had done, but then she would quickly shift and start justifying the murders. She said the men she killed had tried to hurt her or take advantage of her. As far as she was concerned, The killings were acts of self-defense or revenge against a world that had treated her cruelly. These back-and-forth emotions showed how deeply conflicted she really was. She seemed unsure whether she wanted to be forgiven or to stand her ground until the very end. There was also a deep sense of anger toward the world. She blamed not only the prison, but also society, the police, and the justice system as a whole. Wuornos believed the police had let her down many times in her life and had ignored her when she needed help. She said they used her as a way to make money and headlines, turning her life into a media story rather than taking her seriously as a person. In her view, she'd been used and thrown away by everyone around her.
You sabotaged my society and the cops and the system.
As the interview went on, it became clear that Wuornos was no longer trying to save herself. She knew her execution was coming, and she had accepted that. But instead of staying quiet or maybe showing regret, she chose to use her last moments to speak out.
And I cannot go in the execution chamber and be executed under the devil. I have to come clean and cleanse my spirit in the name of Jesus Christ.
She wanted to make sure the world heard her side of the story, even if it was messy, confusing, and full of rage. She didn't care how she looked. She only cared about telling her truth. As she saw it, her behavior would become more intense the longer she spoke. Her voice grew louder, and her words came faster. Toward the end of the interview, her anger took over completely. She was attacking the interviewer, claiming he didn't get it and was blinded by the system. And finally, she made one last unforgettable gesture. She looked straight into the camera and gave the middle finger.
We're going to have to cut this interview, Nick. I'm not going to go into any more detail. I'm leaving. I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass.
Wuornos didn't become a notorious serial killer overnight. Her life of violence and desperation was shaped by years of abuse, neglect, and betrayal. To truly understand her, we must delve deep into the harrowing childhood that shaped her.
We have evil in us, all of us do. And my evil would just happen to come out because of the circumstances of what I was doing.
Born February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, Aileen Carol Wuornos was the daughter of Diane Wuornos, who was just 16 years old at the time. She was far too young to provide proper care, and Eileen's father, Leo Dale Pittman, was a man with a dark past. He was a convicted chomo who would later hang himself in prison when Aileen was just 13 years old. And from the start, Eileen's family was pretty fractured. Her parents' marriage quickly fell apart, and Diane, overwhelmed and unprepared for motherhood, abandoned Aileen and her older brother Keith when Aileen was just 4 years old. The children are left in the care of their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos, who weren't able to raise them with that love and stability. What should have been a safe haven became a nightmare. Eileen's grandfather, Lori Wuornos, was a very violent alcoholic who physically and inappropriately touched her throughout her childhood. Neighbors and relatives later recalled hearing screams from the house, but no one intervened. Aileen would later describe her grandfather as a sadistic man who beat her with belts, locked her in the basement, and molested her repeatedly. Meanwhile, her grandmother, Britta, was aware of this abuse and did little to stop it. Some reports suggest she blamed Aileen for seducing her grandfather. That cruel and twisted justification from her own grandmother only deepened her trauma. The abuse left Aileen with deep psychological wounds, making it impossible to trust adults or even form healthy relationships. Diane Wuornos, Eileen's mother, was a ghostly figure in her life. She drifted in and out, struggling with alcoholism and mental instability. When she did return, she was often drunk, violent, or emotionally distant. At times, she would disappear for weeks, leaving Aileen and her brother Keith to fend for themselves. One particularly cruel incident stands out. When Aileen was just around 7 years old, Diane briefly takes her and Keith back, only to abandon them again at a roadside bar. The children waited for hours before again their grandparents are called in to retrieve them. This repeated rejection shattered Eileen's sense of worth. teaching her that love was conditional and unreliable. So by the time Aileen was 11, she's already acting out violently. She starts stealing, setting fires, and getting into fights at school. She's expelled multiple times for aggressive behavior, and teachers noted her uncontrollable rage. With no stable home, she began running away frequently, sometimes living in the woods near her house. She would sleep in abandoned cars or sheds, surviving on scraps of food. Now, during these escapes, she was vulnerable to further abuse, including assaults by older men who preyed on homeless children. At 14, Aileen becomes pregnant, which was a devastating consequence of her unstable life. The father was reportedly a family friend, or possibly even a relative, though the exact details remain unclear. The pregnancy is yet another trauma that only makes her situation worse. She gave birth to a baby boy in 1971, but is forced to give him up for adoption, which was a loss that haunted her for years. By this point, she dropped out of school entirely, with no education, no family support, and no future prospects. And with nowhere to go, Aileen turns to prostitution at the age of 15. The streets were brutal. She was beaten, raped, and robbed by clients and pimps. She learned to carry a knife for protection and started developing a hardened exterior to survive. At one point, she briefly married an elderly man named Louis Fell in 1976, hoping for stability. But when he discovered her criminal past, he ended that marriage within weeks, leaving her even more distressed. By her late teens, Aileen was now deeply traumatized, showing signs of PTSD, borderline personality disorder, and severe depression. She disliked men and sees them as predators. Her brother Keith was one of the few people she did trust, but even that relationship was strained. In 1976, Keith died of throat cancer, leaving her completely alone. With no family, no home, and no hope, Aileen's rage slowly built up until it exploded in a shocking series of violence and murders.
Yeah, and I gotta come clean that I killed those 7 men in first-degree murder and robbery.
Between 1989 and 90, Aileen Wuornos turned Florida's highways into hunting grounds, leaving 7 men dead in her wake. Each killing was marked by the same brutal pattern: execution-style gunshots, stolen belongings, and bodies dumped like discarded trash. At first, she claimed she was fighting back, a victim pushed to the edge. But as the deception behind her story faded, a far uglier truth emerged. This wasn't self-defense. It was cold, calculated murder for profit. November 30th, 1989, Wuornos committed her first murder. The victim would be Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics shop owner. Now, Mallory wasn't a saint. He had a criminal record, including a past rape conviction. Wuornos later insisted that he picked her up, took her into the woods, and violently assaulted her. In her version, she fought back in a desperate act of survival, using a gun to end him. But the evidence tells a different story. Mallory's body was found in a remote part of Volusia County, stripped of anything valuable. His car was gone, and Wuornos had used his credit cards after his death. This wasn't the behavior of someone acting purely in self-defense, maybe the work of someone who saw an opportunity to kill, rob, and walk away with whatever she could take. Once she crossed that line, Wuornos couldn't stop. Over the next 6 months, she killed again and again, each murder following the same ruthless script. David Spears would be her second victim, a 43-year-old construction worker found dead in Marion County. Now, unlike Mallory, Spears had no violent history. Wuornos shot him in the back, which was a clear sign this wasn't a struggle, but an ambush. She takes his truck, another sign that robbery was part of the plan from the start. Then came Charles Dick Humphreys, a 56-year-old former police chief. His murder sent shockwaves throughout Florida. It made people think if a seasoned cop could fall victim, then who was safe? Wuornos claimed he attacked her, but again, the evidence suggested otherwise. Humphreys was shot multiple times, his body left on the side of the road like the others. Troy Burress, a 50-year-old delivery driver, was next. His truck was abandoned, his wallet missing. Charles Karskeden, a 40-year-old rodeo worker, was so badly decomposed when found that police initially mistook him for a teenager. Wuornos later bragged about killing him, showing absolutely no remorse. Then there's Peter Sims, a 65-year-old missionary, the only victim whose body was never found. His blood-stained car was discovered, but Sims himself vanished without a trace. His case remains the most haunting, because without a body, some questions can never be truly answered. And the final murder was Walter Gino Antonio. On July 31st, 1990, by the time Wuornos killed the 60-year-old trucker, the pattern was clear. He was shot 6 times, body dumped in Dixie County, but this time Wuornos didn't take his car. Maybe she sensed the police were closing in, or maybe she was growing reckless. Either way, this would be her last murder, because soon the game was gonna change.
I sentence you to death for the murder of Charles Humphreys.
Thank you. And I'll be up in heaven while y'all are rotting in hell.
January 9th, 1991, Aileen Wuornos was arrested. However, the events leading up to it started months earlier. We go to July 1990. Wuornos and her partner, Tyria Moore, crash a car that belongs to one of Wuornos' victims. Now that crash happens in Orange Springs, Florida. After the accident, witnesses saw 2 women fleeing the scene. When police later search that abandoned car, they find fingerprints inside. One of the prints matched Wuornos, who already had a criminal record. This was the first clear link between her and one of the murdered men. Police would also discover that items belonging to several victims had been pawned in shops across Florida. The pawn tickets had a thumbprint and a fake name, Cammie Marsh Green, one of the many aliases of Wuornos. When they checked thumbprints, again, they matched Wuornos. Meanwhile, police had composite sketches of the 2 women seen with the stolen car. The sketches are published in newspapers and on TV. Several people who would see Wuornos and Moore together called in tips, and at this point, detectives knew who they were looking for. We go to January 9th, 1991. Undercover police officers find Wuornos drinking alone at the Last Resort Bar in Port Orange, Florida. They don't arrest her right away for murder. Instead, they use an outstanding warrant for an old gun charge under one of her aliases. This helps them arrest her calmly without alerting Moore, who they also needed to find. So on the next day, January 10th, police track down Tyria Moore in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where she'd gone to stay with her family. When the police tell her that Wuornos was suspected of multiple murders, Moore is shocked and scared. She agrees to help the investigation in exchange for immunity, which meant she wouldn't be charged. Police brought Moore back to Florida. They put her in a motel and recorded her phone calls with Wuornos. Over several days, the 2 talked, and slowly Moore convinced her to confess. On January 16, 1991, during one of these calls, Wuornos admitted to killing the men, but claimed it was in self-defense. That confession was recorded and becomes a major piece of evidence. Later, police find more proof to support the confession. The bullets found in several of the victims' bodies were all fired from the same .22 caliber pistol, which Wuornos had used. Other items belonging to victims were found in storage lockers she had rented. With this evidence, fingerprints, pawn slips, the confession, and ballistics, Wuornos is formally charged with the murder of Richard Mallory, and later with the 6 other murders. She never denied the killings, but always said these men had tried to hurt or rape her. However, prosecutors didn't believe her version of events. And for a while, Wuornos managed to control the narrative. She claimed every killing was self-defense, casting herself as a victim fighting back against violent men. The media ran with that story, some even painting her as this feminist icon, a woman pushed to extremes by a lifetime of abuse. But the facts didn't add up. Most of her victims had no history of violence. They were ordinary guys, construction workers, truckers, and a retired cop. Most of them didn't even fit the profile of a predator. Now, aside from this, the gunshot pattern showed execution, not struggle. However, with stolen properties linking her to the crimes and Moore's testimony, there was no doubt about her guilt. May 15, 1992, Wuornos was handed 6 death sentences after several weeks of trial. Interestingly, she showed no remorse, despite receiving the worst punishment possible.
I'm being really straight up about everything. There's no self-defense. I'm really sorry what happened about everything.
While Aileen Wuornos waited on death row, Her story became known all over the world. She became the subject of news reports, books, documentaries, and even a Hollywood movie. People everywhere were talking about her, asking whether she was a cold-blooded killer or just a damaged woman shaped by years of pain and abuse. At first, most people saw her as a criminal. But as more details came out, especially about her past, some began to see her as a victim too. The public interest only grew stronger when her trials were shown on TV, and reporters followed every new appeal or update in her case. In 1992, Nick Broomfield's documentary called Aileen Wuornos, The Selling of a Serial Killer, showed how many people, including police officers and even her lawyer, were making money from her story while she sat in prison. It shocked viewers and made them wonder if she had been treated fairly. Now, this made Broomfield return over 10 years later to make his second documentary, Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer. This one focused on her time in prison and the strange, angry things she started saying. So while all this is happening, Aileen's ex-girlfriend, Tyria Moore, had gone quiet. Moore had once been the most important person in Aileen's life, but after her arrest, she agreed to help the police. And some people saw her as a traitor, while others said she was just trying to protect herself from going to prison too. Now, during the years that followed, Moore would stay away from the spotlight. She didn't give many interviews. When she did speak, she said the whole thing had left her heartbroken and confused. She claimed she still cared about Aileen, but had felt she had no choice at the time. Even though her lawyers filed appeals, most of them were denied. A few people tried to argue that she was mentally ill and shouldn't be executed, but the courts ruled that she was sane enough to be put to death. In the end, Aileen herself said she was ready to die. She believed the prison was trying to torture her, and she wanted to get it over with. October 9th, 2002 was her last day, and it began at Florida State Prison with a quiet routine. That morning, prison guards moved through their usual motions, entering cells, checking on inmates, and preparing for the day. Aileen accepted the guards' offer without resistance. They handed her a washcloth and towel. One last chance to freshen up before her final moments. She didn't argue or ask questions and simply went through what she had to do. They gave her a clean white garment to wear. At exactly 6 a.m., one of the officers led her to a private room. This space is meant for last-minute letters or any final words she might want to say. But Aileen didn't say much. She stayed mostly silent, except for a few scattered remarks about angels. She mentions them more than once. It's clear that she believed she wasn't alone. Even as death approached, she insisted there were spiritual beings around her, watching, maybe even guiding her.
I'm okay. I'm okay. God is going to be there. Jesus Christ is going to be there. All the angels and everything.
In those final days on death row, Aileen did live a strange mix of faith, anger, and what some might even call a prophecy. She talked a lot about heaven. Aileen believed with full conviction that she was gonna go meet God. That belief gave her a sense of purpose. She said she hoped the men she had killed would find forgiveness too. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, prison staff are preparing the execution room. The process was technical and sterile, more like a surgery than a death. Tubes checked, IV lines ready, monitors tested, chairs for witnesses arranged with precision. Every step followed the official playbook. Around 7 a.m., Aileen's taken back to her cell. She walks slowly, as if every step carried the weight of what was to come. Once inside, she's asking for gospel music. She wants to hear hymns, songs about God, salvation, and peace. As she waited for the final call, that request, too, was granted. At some point before 8 a.m., a prison psychologist came by to speak with her. They talk briefly. The psychologist lets her know she has the right to make one last phone call, but Aileen declines. She doesn't want to speak to anybody. Looks like she made her peace, or had already said everything she needed to say. At 8:30 a.m., the moment came. Guards arrived to walk her down the corridor to the execution chamber. This part of the process is known as the gauntlet. 4 guards flanked her, 2 on each side, guiding her silently down the hall. It's prison policy that this walk must be done without shackles, and Aileen walked with steady steps. No trembling, no crying, no fear on her face. When she reached the chamber, the staff explains the next steps. She'd be asked if she wanted to say any last words, then be laid on the gurney. A pamphlet nearby explains the chemicals that would be used. 9 a.m. She enters the chamber. She doesn't resist as they secure her into the gurney with straps. She accepts a sip of water, but turns down a final cigarette. Earlier that day, she also refused a last meal. All she asked for was a cup of dark coffee. Simple, no request for steak or dessert, just the strong, bitter taste of coffee. Monitors are attached to her wrist and ankles. A nurse inserts an IV into her arm. 3 different drugs are used. The first to sedate, the second to paralyze, and the third, potassium chloride, to stop her heart. Florida law demands that every step be documented, every dose measured. While the whole process was precise, even clinical, there was no room for mistakes. By 9:30 a.m., the witnesses were brought in. There were 2 spiritual advisors, 2 members of the media, and 2 relatives of the victims. Everyone sat behind thick glass. They could see her, but she can't see them. The door to the chamber clicks shut. At 9:38 a.m., someone asks if she has any final words. Aileen didn't hesitate. She said,
"I'm sailing with the rock. I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus."
Her final words were strange to some, but to her, they made perfect sense. Had to be a mix of religious faith and something deeply personal, something only she fully understood. The IV began to drip. The sedative took hold quickly. Her eyes fluttered, then closed. A few seconds later, her chest stopped rising and falling. The paralytic had taken effect, and finally potassium chloride did its job. At 9:47 a.m., her heart stopped. A doctor entered, checked her vitals, and confirmed what everyone already knew. She was gone. Time of death, 9:47 a.m. Everything's logged. Time, names of those present, the drugs used, and her final words. Medical staff would move in, unhook the IV, cover her with a sheet, and gently wheel her body away. Her remains are sent to the county medical examiner's office. An autopsy is done, as is required. The report confirms the cause of death: lethal injection. No trauma. Nothing out of the ordinary. Her body was cleaned and placed in a bag. Then she was cremated. Her ashes are placed in an urn and sent to her hometown, Rochester, Michigan. There, as she had requested, her ashes were scattered beneath a tree. It was a quiet ending to a life filled with violence, pain, and chaos. But her story doesn't end there. Later that same year, in 2003, the movie Monster was released. Charlize Theron plays Aileen, and the film shows Wuornos in a different perspective. Not just as a killer, but a damaged soul shaped by abuse, abandonment, and survival. The movie paints a more human portrait of her life. It shows her troubled childhood, her toxic relationship with her girlfriend, and the desperation that led her to kill. Theron won that Academy Award for that. She killed it, and the film brought Aileen's story into homes around the world. More books followed. Lethal Intent by Sue Russell takes a deep dive into her crimes and the legal process. Dead Ends by Michael Reynolds tries to understand the psychological and social forces that shaped her. Later, a book titled Dear Dawn was published, a collection of letters Aileen had written to a childhood friend during her time on death row. That gave people a raw, personal glimpse into her mind. Here she's talking about her fears, her belief in conspiracy, and her certainty that the system wanted her dead from the start. Whether seen as a cold-blooded killer or a tragic product of a broken life, Aileen Wuornos left behind more than a criminal record, as she left several questions unanswered. Questions about justice, redemption, trauma, and what makes someone cross the line from a victim to a cold-blooded killer.